It's time for Top Story on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. Here's Ryan O'Neill.
Well, this week in the news, we had local village elections. No big surprises there locally. Most of the incumbents were put back into office. Mayor Sean Hogan in Hornell announced he wants to raise the rates for the Haas bus tour rides from $31.50 up. Alderman John Buckley says the HAT bus system should stop using diesel. He wants to switch to another type of fuel. Slight tax increase proposed for the Hornell School District. That's tentative. That's possibly going to change. Hornell's water supply may have a leak in it somewhere. Officials say that the Hornell system is going through water a lot faster than usual. Buffalo businessman Carl Palladino says he's not running for governor. That news comes after Trump says he's not running either. That leaves only Astorino, though Palladino is trying to do an online campaign to draft Donald Trump into running for governor. And Congressman Tom Reed, he announced he's running for the House again, and Reed talked to U.S. Health and Human Services Director Kathleen Sebelius about hospitals in his congressional district, including St. James Hospital in Hornell. Congressman Tom Reed is our guest today, saying hello to the congressman.
Yeah, Brian.
Hello, Congressman.
Hello, how are you today?
Doing well, doing well. Congressman, here's what you said to Kathleen Sebelius.
Representing a rural district in western New York, I can tell you the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement cuts that your proposals have done and implemented are seriously jeopardizing our critical access hospitals, our low-volume Medicare-dependent hospitals. I'm dealing with one right now, St. James Hospital.
Congressman, you went on to talk to Sebelius about how St. James and the hospital in Chautauqua County, Lakeshore Hospital, were having a tough time on their own. Lakeshore slated to close originally, and St. James had to revamp their entire style of how they will be serving the public. Now, both hospitals, as I say, had their own specific problems outside of what the administration's doing. But I'm wondering, Congressman, what is it that the administration's doing now that you believe hurts hospitals like St. James and Hornell?
Well, as I told the Secretary Sebelius about these cuts that Medicare and Medicaid are being subjected to in regards to the reimbursement to our rural hospitals, our rural providers, they're at the point now where they're cutting through the bone and really structurally changing and not allowing these facilities to remain open. And I wanted her to know her policies, the president's policies, are really jeopardizing hospitals like St. James right in our backyard, Lakeshore up in the north part of Chautauqua County. You know, and that's a real access to care issue, because if these hospitals close, where are people going to go? And so I wanted to tell her that we needed her to be aware of it, first of all. Second, they need to stop going down this policy and work with us to put a solution in that's going to keep these doors open.
Did you get any kind of real response from Sebelius on what you said?
Yeah, essentially it was the classic D.C. two-step where we got to work together and we'll try to get it done, but no real solution, no real concern, in my opinion, that there was any level of care or commitment to really changing the course of where they're going with these provider cuts. These Medicare provider cuts, for example, and Medicaid cuts are in the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare legislation, and now they keep tripling down on what I consider to be a long path for the future of America's healthcare, and that's implement price control through government bureaucrats, and that's what they're doing. We need to empower doctors and individuals, not insurance carriers and government bureaucrats with our healthcare decisions.
And you've spoken with St. James CEO Jennifer Sullivan about these problems?
We have, and this is where I really appreciate the work that St. James is doing and trying to live under the pressure that's coming out of Washington, D.C., and that's where we have partnered with not only St. James but our rural hospitals across the country, and worked with people across the aisle, and with Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont in particular, on one very clear area, and that's our Medicare-dependent and low-volume hospitals that St. James is one of. That we hopefully will see some relief here real soon, because we have that bipartisan legislation out there that has a chance to get to the finish line. That will help St. James, but it won't be the cure-all and the long-term fix. We got to get this health care issue back on the table and implement real solutions that are going to empower individuals and empower doctors rather than insurance carriers and bureaucrats.
Congressman Reed, Senator Chuck Schumer is working on legislation. This just came out Friday to protect reporters from government, I guess you'd call it over-scrutiny. Any scrutiny you'd kind of wonder about. But the kind of things we saw happen to Associated Press reporters and Fox News reporter James Rosen, where phone records were looked into by the government. Now, Drudge pointed out there's a little flaw in Schumer's legislation. A federal judge would have the ability to decide whether a reporter in a case was what they call a covered journalist, who would be granted the privileges of this new law. The definition, I guess, of a covered journalist is an official reporter, someone who's been employed for at least 1 year as an employee, independent contractor, or agent of what they say is an entity that disseminates news. Congressman Reed, in today's reporter world, this leaves out the independent, I guess you'd almost say YouTube reporters. Do you think that Schumer's legislation does not go far enough because it leaves out the YouTubers who are very, very important in today's world? The people that just happen to have a camera on them when they're either at a courtroom or on a street or in a town hall or even witnessing arrests. Your thoughts on that little flaw with the law, Congressman Reed?
Well, Brian, obviously, I'm concerned about what Senator Schumer is proposing, but fundamentally, I think we need to look at it first and foremost from protecting the constitutional freedoms that are embraced with the freedom of press, and to somehow think that champion legislation is going to further protect that which we hold dear under the Constitution, and that's our constitutional fundamental freedoms, such as the freedom of press. We need to start with the conversation as to why the senator feels that legislation needs to be done in order to enforce the Constitution. The Constitution is that fundamental document, that principle, if you would, that we should all adhere to and enforce vigorously without the need for additional legislation. Now, that being said, obviously, if there needs to be a directive or there needs to be some push or priority, I'll join with Senator Schumer to say we need to stand with our reporters. We need to stand with the freedom of press, regardless of who they are, what definition they operate under, and fundamentally stand with that pure freedom that the freedom of press is represented in our Constitution. And that's where I'd love to work with the senators and others to say, let's not talk about getting political headlines and drafting legislation. Let's talk about enforcing our Constitution and providing those protections to our reporters, the freedom of press and the press from whatever angle they're coming from, because that's what makes us a strong and vigorous country.
Yeah, I can just tell you, Congressman Reed, I get stories and video clips from the average people on the street, the citizen reporters, and some of that stuff is great stuff, especially when they grab out their cell phone in one of those situations and whatever it is, video a fire or video a political meeting. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that you get from that information. Now, last week it broke on Drudge. The FOIL requests show that the Drudge Report and other media outlets have been monitored by Homeland Security. Homeland Security apparently has been reading Drudge's Twitter and Facebook postings. Not the end of the world, but why would Homeland Security be wasting time on something like that? It's kind of a pattern here.
Well, and that's exactly the problem of this big government overreach that we were starting to see in regards to Homeland Security. And that's where we have the need for, in my opinion, reforms of our intelligence community, our intelligence laws, to make sure that we're protecting our fundamental freedoms. Now, I understand if there is indications out there that there is concrete evidence, sufficient evidence that there is something that is amiss where our national security interests are potentially jeopardized, our safety as individuals are demonstrated to be at risk, then there's a process that we go through, and that's following the Constitution due process requirements of making sure that there's oversight and that pushback, if you would, if the government's overreaching in its efforts. And those are the reforms that we've been championing and continue to champion in Washington, and make sure that we go forward as we get into the opportunity of how we're going to reform our intelligence and homeland security provisions.
And not to keep on this topic of the media, but Congressman Reed, CBS TV Philadelphia broke a story Friday that CBS reporter Cheryl Atkinson, who's come out against the mainstream media now, she says there's much collusion between reporters and politicians at the White House level. Here's what she says. Reporters tell Jay Carney, the White House press spokesman, ahead of time what they're going to be asking him to give him an advantage. And which is kind of ironic because you, of course, Congressman Reed, get the opposite kind of treatment. If anything, you get a hatchet job before the weekly phone presser. What do you think of what Cheryl Atkinson has said? Do you think there's any truth to that the Beltway reporters are leaking their questions ahead of time to the White House?
Oh, I'm sure that is occurring. I am sure there is a requirement that some of these elected officials require that in order for the elected official or the president's spokesperson to respond to questions, that they're going to get the demand that they have pre-submitted questions so that they can answer them. From my perspective, that's not the right way to represent folks. I mean, as you know, do a weekly press call that's unscripted. We open it up to any question. I do more town halls than I believe any member in the Northeast, if not any member of the entire Congress, of getting in front of the public. We invite people to the public in an open and honest fashion. I think if you're really going to represent people, you got to subject yourself to being put in front of people to not only tell them what you're doing, but listen to them. And that accountability makes me and makes other elected officials who do it, I think, a stronger elected official. And you can't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't know. We're all human. We're all human. But the commitment I always say and have committed to is if I don't know, I'll get the answer, or I'll get some type of response together after we do our due diligence. And that makes us stronger. And that's where being accessible and listening to people is core mission number one in our office.
And what about what Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi says about the CIA hacking into her computer?
Yeah, we've been hearing some rumors and comments that Nancy Pelosi and Senator Feinstein are referencing, and it goes to the fundamental.
Did I misspeak? I meant to say Feinstein.
Feinstein, yeah, and it goes to the fundamental issue that I share with them is we need to make sure that our privacy rights, those fundamental principles of freedom that we hold near and dear under our Constitution and here in America are protected, and that there is due process in place for the government in regards to having to pursue areas that go into those areas of privacy. So I share the concern that is raised, but we need to be very careful not to make it a political issue. We need to make it based on the Constitution, the freedoms, and policy-based determinations.
We're talking with Congressman Tom Reed here on Top Story on AM 1480 WLEA. When we get back, we'll get the Congressman's view on Russia, the Ukraine, and other issues. Stay with us. Back on Top Story, Brian O'Neill on the phone now with Congressman Tom Reed. Congressman Reed, an Edward Snowden leak has some very interesting information in it. The NSA goes around hacking into administrator accounts on Facebook and hacking into people's emails. That's according to Snowden. Your take on that allegation?
Well, obviously some of the things that Mr. Snowden has released has caused us great concern, and that's where we've lined up. And I think we have an opportunity here as we go into the intelligence reauthorization period out of Washington, D.C., those laws that set forth essentially the framework of our intelligence operations, that we can implement some real reforms that are going to protect our privacy, our constitutional fundamental freedoms, and put in place mechanisms that are not rubber stamp mechanisms, but make sure to strike that balance where we have individuals in the process that are fundamentally and solely directed to protecting our freedoms and our privacy rights. Right now, I don't think we have that level of scrutiny and level of commitment to those privacy rights that we need in that process, and we're going to work to make sure we do that. Now, I will say, though, there are some things that I believe Edward Snowden has done that are potentially dangerous in regards to sensitive military secrets, other issues that he swiped as he took tremendous amounts of data and information with him over to Russia, and Russia obviously not being a real good friend of ours, as demonstrated by some of the recent activity that they've put on the world stage. So I am concerned about breaching those national security, top secret type of sensitive military national security secrets that he may have had his hand in. But fundamentally, it does raise some serious issues, and we need to deal with those issues proactively and responsibly.
On the topic of Russia and the Ukraine and the annexation of the Crimea region, your take on all of that, Congressman Reed?
Well, first, my take is This is what you get when you see foreign policy that is not clear, consistent, and when we don't have a White House and a president, in my opinion, that demonstrates not just rhetoric but action and is consistent in his words and his actions, because that causes a lot of instability and it's very troublesome when you get those conflicting messages sent on a foreign policy basis around the world. Now, as to Russia specifically in the Ukraine, now first and foremost, I mean, I don't support military engagement in the Ukraine or anything of that nature. But at the same time, we got to make sure that our allies, especially our NATO allies, know that we will honor our commitments to be with them, so that if Russia goes beyond the activity that we've already seen demonstrated, if they make any type of incursions into other sovereign countries in that area of the world, that they know that there are people that are going to stand and say, no, these are our friends, these are our allies who do not want to be overtaken, and that's it's a situation that we have to watch very closely. But anytime we talk about these entanglements, my first and foremost analysis is, why is this in our national security interest to be involved in it? And we did the same analysis under Syria. We did the same analysis under Libya when we did not support engagement in those arenas, because it's never been clearly demonstrated to me as to why we should engage in these areas because of our national security concerns. And that's got to be the initial calculation.
Critics say that on foreign policy, Obama's gone around drawing lines in the sand and oftentimes not backing his words with any kind of force.
Yeah, the inconsistency is the problem. I mean, drawing lines in the sand and then not following through on it. First of all, I don't know if you should ever draw a line in the sand on a foreign policy platform, because then you limit your options and you box yourself into a corner, and that's some place you don't want to be on foreign policy. You need to be clear, very direct into your position, but make sure that you always have the ability to position yourself to take on the issue, rather than locking yourself in a predetermined course that the adversary could then take advantage of because they know exactly where you're going to go. But at the same time, that being said, what I'm seeing is just this inconsistency. Who are our allies? And our allies are telling us that. When you have Russia openly laughing at potential sanctions, and you put sanctions on 11 people as a result of this behavior, that to me is something that we should all be concerned about. And this failure of leadership, as many people have called it, coming out of the White House right now, it's a failure in standing firm and being clear, not just in words, but in actions and other consistent behavior that backs up the policies and the clear policy that we should have as American foreign policy. We just don't have that clear lined out foreign policy initiative.
And how do you think that Secretary of State John Kerry has done handling this whole thing?
Secretary Kerry, I mean, obviously, when you have a White House and an administration and a president that's sending conflicting messages, that's going to make the Secretary of State's job very difficult, in my opinion, as he's trying to walk that fine line of trying to understand that inconsistent behavior himself. So I think the Secretary has some difficulties created by the White House and the administration and President Obama himself. And Secretary Kerry is out there. I give him credit for traveling the world and trying to be that voice in those areas of the world where America's interests need to be represented. But at the end of the day, I think there's also some naivety on his part in regards when he makes comments like, in the 21st century, why is this behavior of Russia acceptable? Well, this has been going on in world history for eons. Countries behaving in this way, and to somehow believe that all of a sudden now we're not living in the real world any longer, to me is a little naive and a little problematic, in my opinion.
And final question, it's a campaign question. Your opponent, Democrat Martha Robertson from Tompkins County, a lot of people say I think she's actually Dryden. But anyways, she's demanded info about your email conversations with House Ethics, implying that you're under investigation by House Ethics. You say that you're not. She comes back and says you are. Martha Robertson also continues to dodge questions about her claim that her computer was hacked. She reportedly made $31,000 in one day from a fundraising email where she sent out an email saying that she needed money help because her computers were hacked by Republican ops, and she never proved that that was true. Anything you wanted to say on those two issues, Congressman Reed?
And that's part of the irony here. I mean, we've been cooperative. We've let the process, complied with the process from day one in regards to these issues of winding down our affairs and things of that nature. And then here you got Martha Robinson, who, in my opinion, has committed wire fraud, has essentially lied to her own supporters. I guess it's not surprising to me. She'll say whatever she wants to or needs to say in order to get elected and rationalize it as if that's the right thing to do. She should answer those questions as to why she said her account was hacked and had no, where's the proof for that hacking event? And then, when she promised to investigate it and get to the bottom of it, they do a 180 and say, well, no, we're not going to do that. That inconsistency is something that should trouble folks as they go forward. In regards to our situation, we have always been cooperative, working with the process. I haven't practiced law, for example, from the day I took office. Brought the ethics committee right into it in regards to how do we do this appropriately, consistent with the law. We were concerned about the loss of 24 jobs by immediately being forced to shut down the business, and it was just a real practical situation where we were as cooperative as possible and trying to do the right thing. But this is also I think part of the political season we're going to see coming out of my opponent Martha Robinson. Rather than talk about the issues, my priority issue is creating the jobs of today and tomorrow. And as Martha Robinson has said, my opponent has said, in her heart of hearts, the number one reason why she's running for Congress is global warming, climate change. To me, that's the wrong priority for the 23rd Congressional District. We need to be talking about what are the jobs we're going to create for today and tomorrow. How are we going to build it here and sell it there? And that's where this debate should focus, and that's a fair debate to have as we go into 2014, and I'm confident, given our record and given how we proceed with this job, that we're going to be successful, and we'll continue to do the work of the people in Washington, D.C. come November 2014.
Congressman, from my viewpoint as a reporter, it's one thing for Martha Robertson, a political candidate, to talk about some of these issues. It's quite another for these reporters in the Beltway who jump on these press calls to make these either mini scandals or non-stories, create mountains out of molehills. Your thoughts there?
Well, and we've had this conversation before, Brian, but we're going to continue to be accessible. We'll keep doing these press calls, and
that's very nice of you under the circumstances.
And I appreciate the sentiment of what you're saying and the question you're asking. And we're just going to let people decide. I mean, we'll subject ourselves, so we know who we are. And we'll continue to do the work we're trying to do, and God willing, and the people so deciding, we'll keep doing it until the job is done. And that's fighting for our future, creating those jobs of today and tomorrow.
All righty, Congressman Tom Reed. Any final thoughts before we go?
Well, I'm so glad to hear the weather's changing. I know we've experienced that ourselves up there in Western New York. It's time for the spring to rise, and let's enjoy some warm weather for once. This has been a long, cold winter, and that's again why. I don't think the priority, as my opponent said, should be global warming, climate change as in our hearts of hearts. We need to focus on the real priorities of Western New York, and that's creating the jobs of today and tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Always good to have you on.
Thanks so much, Brian. You take care now.
And the auction's coming up next.